My name is Amber Lee, and I live here in Asheville, North Carolina, with my dog, Captain. Captain is the love of my life. He's an Alaskan Klekai Husky with a mostly black coat, but with streaks of white fur around his legs and face, not to mention little rings of dark fur around his pale blue eyes that make him kind of look like the Hamburglar. I rescued him from a shelter when he was just a puppy, right after my fiancée moved out to Hong Kong for work. He helped me through the initial loneliness on nights when I just couldn't handle getting into an empty bed for the 50th time, and in the years that followed when my husband decided he would be better off starting a family with a Chinese woman he met through his job. Captain helped me through the heartbreak. Captain is a big guy, a subwoofer. While other dogs need walks, Captain needs hikes. Which is why, every weekend for the past few years, I would drive him out to a national forest, Nantala to be exact. One of the few places he could really be. Dogs just aren't meant to be cooped up indoors. They need to run, they need to explore, they need a place like this. And coincidentally, so did I. This national forest was a place I could really lose myself, a place to escape the pressure of high-pressure, high-paying job. The woods were a place of sanctuary to me, but that all changed one chilly October day when I came to realize that there is a damned good reason why human beings have walled themselves off in towns and cities, because the wilderness, it seems, is not our friend. Captain was always his happiest in the woods. For such a majestic animal, he has an uncanny ability to act goofy as hell, and the woods brought that out of him in spades. He'd be so lost in the feeling of pure freedom, his blue eyes all wide with his tongue lolling out to one side of his mouth, riding the wave of zoomies that inevitably had me laughing at how dorky he acted. So, you could imagine how quickly I noticed a change in his behavior, how he went from being such a loud, boisterous dog to a quivering, whining wreck that barely ventured a few feet away from me at any one time. And all the time I'd been taking Captain out to this forest, I'd never seen him act in such a way. And when I laid a hand on his neck to give him a stroke, I discovered he was actually trembling in fear. My first thought was that a mountain lion could have been in the area, but a previous encounter with what I'd figure was a predator's scent trail had caused Captain to bark incessantly and become overly aggressive. Now, this was back in the fall of last year, and that during the previous summer, the National Forest had seen a sharp increase in black bear activity, with homeowners being encouraged to be much more careful. Surrounding issues of food disposal, it was entirely possible that Captain had sniffed out a mama bear and cubs, in which he was outright terrified. I had no idea what to make of such a situation, but one thing was clear though. Captain wanted out, and consequently, so did I. There was only one big problem with such a plan. We'd already spent like 2 hours hiking in the woods. Getting out would not be quick or easy. With every step, the tension grew. Captain looking behind me with wild, terrified eyes, darting ahead before doubling back to whine at me. Each footstep seemed a little quicker than the last. My utter paranoia growing to fever pitch as I continually looked behind me and continually saw nothing. But something was behind us. Captain knew it, and I could feel it. At one point, he bounded back to my side and froze, staring off into the dense forest as he sniffed at the air before him. I thought the worst was over, but I was horribly, horribly wrong. With a yelp so loud, it hurt my ears. He burst off through the trees ahead, howling barks punctuating his canine gallop. That's when I heard it, a rustling in the trees behind me, and with a terror so rampant, I could still feel it to this day. I heard something behind me breathing, and it was huge. I just ran, following the sound of Captain's barks, crashing through the dense trees as dry branches tore at the bare skin on my face. There are many times in my life where I'd been uncomfortable, anxious, or scared. This experience dwarfed them all. No emotion can compare to that knowing you're being hunted by something something that you cannot reason or bargain with, something that will crunch your bones into meal and not feel a damned thing. I ran harder and longer than I ever have in my life, so intensely that when I finally had to stop to draw breath, I found myself dry retching against a tree trunk, out of exhaustion, out of fear, out of pure biological imperative, making me as light and mobile as possible. But there could be no respite. Captain's furious barks made that abundantly clear. We had to keep moving. It was that or be eaten alive. With tears in my eyes, I carried on running, hurtling through the forest, the thickets so dense I was running half blind, which was made painfully obvious when I caught my foot on a fallen tree trunk and was sent flying into the dirt. The impact alone knocked the wind out of me with an ugly grunt, and as I rolled onto my back, struggling for breath, I saw Captain appear at my side. He had been my hero so many times before, and wasn't about to fail me now. His barks were wild, full of rage, his sharp teeth exposed as he poured the raw force of his being into the woods behind us. It was terrifying, awe-inspiring to behold, and in that moment, I thanked God that he was on my side. But not even Captain could maintain the display, for when the unseen thing hunting us seemed to roar back through the trees, Captain was silenced. He rushed over to me, taking the collar of my waterproof coat between his teeth and trying to drag me along the forest floor. But I was renewed by terror, by biological imperative, by the damn raw need to survive. In an instant, I was back on my feet, running, panting, scrambling for life. I remember there being a moment when I was terrified that Captain might leave me, how the fear might prove too much for him to handle. There was so much of the forest for him to escape into, but he never once failed to double back and find me. Even when he was out of sight, he made sure to continue barking furiously, so I'd know exactly where to run to. That was until I burst through a set of particularly thick bushes to find Captain, stood stationary at a riverbank. It wasn't all that wide or all that deep, but it was enough of an obstacle to halt his progress. You see, Captain hated water. I don't know if it was something that happened to him as a puppy before we adopted him from the shelter, but Captain has always hated water. Pools, rivers, lakes. You couldn't get him to go within 6 feet of any of them, which is why seeing that river in our way terrified me on a whole new level. Out of pure instinct, I just jumped across. Like I said, it wasn't particularly wide, but the exhaustion of running for so long meant I only barely made the jump. I turned, knowing that Captain wouldn't even attempt the jump without encouragement or direction. My voice was trembling as I spoke. "Come on, boy, jump to mama. Please, boy, please jump, mama, come on." It was horrendous, watching his eyes so full of confusion, saying without words, "Why are you making me do this?" I watched him pacing up and down the bank as the thing hunted us grew closer and closer. In the end, I was begging him, pleading with him, promising steak dinners for an entire year if he would only get his ass across the river. For a moment, he froze, sizing up the gap before sprinting off back among the trees. Again, that terrified feeling gripped me. He couldn't do it. He was so terrified of the water that in a moment of pure panic, he'd fled back in the direction of the thing chasing us. It felt like an eternity, standing there on the riverbank, praying that he'd reappear, somehow convincing myself that he wouldn't. Only he did. In one glorious moment, he burst from the foliage, hurtling towards the river's edge at breakneck speed. As he reached the bank, his legs unfurled like springs, sending him sailing through the air, high above the river. It's funny the little details you remember from a traumatic event, and one of the things that sticks with me are Captain's eyes as he jumped that river. They were huge, these massive pale blue circles that seemed to shine out from rings of black fur around them, almost like he couldn't quite believe what he was doing, and quite frankly, neither could I. I mean it when I say he was like an action hero in some hyperbolic 80s movie, The bravery he displayed is something I feel I can only aspire to. Even his landing was dramatic as hell. He barely made it across and was scrambling up the dirt embankment when I leapt towards him, grabbed him by the collar, and pulled him onto the solid ground. When we were up, he took off again with renewed speed, seemingly more terrified of the water than whatever had been stalking us. I'd had tears in my eyes before, but at that point, I broke down completely, calling after him with staggered breathing. "Good boy, Captain. Good boy." I continued to run, feeling my thighs burn and my feet ache from what felt like miles upon miles of it. I was so short of breath, so damn exhausted. I thought I might just pass out at any moment. And when I say I could literally hear my own heart beating in my throat, I'm not exaggerating in the slightest. I am not an unfit person either. I dance a lot, I take a spin class, I have stamina. But running at almost constant sprint for the better part of an hour made it feel like my heart was about to explode out of my chest. By the time I'd reached the peak of yet another gentle incline, my legs gave out from under me. I remember seeing silvery white patches appearing in my vision, and no matter how hard I drew breath, I just couldn't seem to get enough oxygen. When I saw something moving in front of me, something that definitely wasn't Captain, I thought that was it. I thought I'd pass out and never wake up again, having been torn apart by whatever wild animal was chasing us. I woke up in the back seat of a 4-seater pickup truck. As soon as I found the strength to sit up, I heard a voice outside the stationary vehicle shout, "She's awake." Suddenly, the door opened, and a person I'd never seen before in my life was offering me a plastic bottle of water and asking if I was okay. I didn't speak. I just took the water off of him and gulped like 3/4 of it down in one long, sweet chug. By the time I regained my senses, I was panicking. I couldn't see Captain anywhere. I looked at the stranger, dressed in his hunting gear, and tried to summon the strength to ask him where my dog was. Although the words just wouldn't come out. The look on my face must have told him all he needed to know. When he told me Captain was fine, and he was just inside their hunting lodge getting a bite to eat. I just cried with relief. I was overjoyed he was okay, but that's not what made me burst into tears. The hunter told me that, for a while, Captain wouldn't follow any of them out to the truck, no matter how much meat they offered him. He just stayed at my side, yapping and whining, waiting for me to wake up. For a couple of hours, I joined the hunters in their lodge, eating the hamburger they offered me, slowly, while I regained my strength. I told them exactly what had happened, how Captain had freaked out after we stumbled across what I assumed was a black bear. But black bears are relatively small, certainly not as big as grizzlies, and certainly not as big as whatever had been chasing us to the woods. I raised the issue with them and asked them what they thought it might be. I thought they might have an answer, being seasoned hunters, but they didn't. There was this awkward silence as they exchanged looks, before one of them spoke up, telling me they just didn't know. I asked if it was possible that a grizzly bear could make it this far down from the Rockies, with one responding that it was possible. But that was a lie. An outright lie. Those hunters quite possibly saved my life, and for that I will be eternally grateful. But I know they lied to me. Grizzlies don't make it anywhere near North Carolina at any time of the year. I've done a fair amount of research into what was chasing that day, but I've been unable to come up with anything conclusive. The only thing I know for sure is that those hunters were hiding something, and as long as they do, people will continue to go missing in that stretch of North Carolina woodland. Captain is lying next to my computer chair as I write this, ever faithful and ever watchful. And in my darkest moments, I wonder how I'm ever going to last without him. It happened 5 years ago. The official ruling was that his death was caused by a rogue bear attack. You know, when a bear gets a little too used to eating human food, so it doesn't feel threatened anymore and attacks a human. They all know it wasn't a bear though. Bears don't leave wounds like that, and they sure as hell don't pose the body
70 feet up in a dead tree. Yeah, I said pose, but before I get into the details, I should explain a bit about myself now. I'm a park ranger in a very popular national park in the northern United States. I don't want to say exactly which one, although I doubt I'll keep my job for much longer anyway. That's partially why I'm posting this. I need to tell somebody else about this story, and like I said, my colleagues don't want to talk about it. Being a park ranger has given me a lot of weird stories, and everybody is used to weird shit happening in the woods. But this was on a completely different level. For days, we had been getting reports from campers and hikers about strange noises coming from a section of deep backcountry forests, growls, yipping, even human-sounding voices. Equipment and food had been going missing from backcountry campgrounds. All pretty typical stuff that can be explained away pretty easily. Many animals thieve food, make weird noises, and even the human voices can be explained by the sound that foxes and mountain lions make at night. But we needed to investigate either way, because an animal that is conditioned to human food is dangerous. So, we sent our veteran backcountry ranger, Craig McKay. This guy had been working there for 30 years, was an expert outdoorsman, and was my mentor when I first started. As always, he jumped into the task, always eager to go into the backcountry, even though he was getting a little older. I'll pause now and let Craig tell the rest of the story. Well, his journal will have to tell the rest of the story because he isn't alive to tell it. I found his journal, a flashlight in his backpack inside a small cave near the location of his body. A couple of days after he didn't return, and we had sent out a search party to find him. I haven't shared this journal with anyone, not even the other rangers, until now. I'm not exactly sure why I've kept it hidden, other than that the truth seemed so messed up and unreal. I didn't want it to damage people's memory of Craig. I'm not even sure if I believe it myself. Everything what I'm going to read to you had written down over the 2 days he was out on his backcountry excursion. October 21st, 2011. Day 1. Today was a long day, and I can't say that I've made much progress. I've hiked about 15 miles over the course of the day, starting down in the gully, where the reports first started, and ending up at my current camp, which is on the southwest side of Bald Knob. I figure it's a good enough place to keep an eye out for anything coming and going through the valley. Earlier, I found some tracks in the ground in the area, and as close as I can tell, they're from a mountain goat. Odd that it would travel alone, but maybe it was separated from its herd, or dying? It had an odd gait. I followed them for a while, but they didn't lead anywhere, so I abandoned them. Near the tracks was a pervasive smell of death, and I'm assuming a goat got separated and died. Tomorrow, I'm planning to hike across the valley to the mountain on the opposite side and see if I can't catch a track of whatever is harassing the campers. October 22nd, 2011. Morning of day 2. Quick note while I eat breakfast. Last night was a long night. One of the longest I've had in a while. About an hour after going to bed, I heard light steps near the campsite. I grabbed the rifle and went out to investigate. No lights, so my eyes could stay adjusted to the dark. The second I stepped out of my tent, the noise stopped. Whatever was there knew that I was watching. I made a couple of circles around the campsite and found nothing, but I could feel something watching me from the shadows. As I got back into my tent, I thought I saw a tall silhouette in the clearing, but I must have just been seeing things. It was too skinny to be a bear, and nothing else is that tall. The strong scent of death was still present and kept me wary all night. Today's mission has changed. I just got a radio call that a couple of hikers haven't returned when they were supposed to last night and might be lost. I'm still crossing the valley today, but this time to reach where the hikers were supposed to be last.
About 5 years ago, Me and my older sister went to a nature park, a wetland, so to speak. Of course, we went at night so we could skateboard around, because you aren't allowed to. But, in front of her 24-year-old sister. Well, we just went around as the sun was setting. For a little bit, we got lost since the park was so huge and condensed with the thick woods. We were trying to find the bridge, a 20-foot or so bridge so we can hang out just above the rushing river. By the time we got there, the sun was hardly visible over the mountains. I looked around after drinking my water, and here is where the creepy stuff happened. As I looked at the other side of the bridge, I saw a tall, skinny figure. I first shrugged it off like it was a person, maybe a ranger of the park, but then it got on all fours and walked away. I didn't say anything at first, mainly because I thought it was maybe a bear. I looked back at my sister as we chatted about boys and along many other things. Then I looked back at the end of the bridge. My sister did too, and we both saw the figure this time. At this point, I was totally freaked out. Mind you, it's still not dark out. The sky was purple and orange, so it wasn't like we were seeing things that when your mind pictures figures in the dark. No, it was right there, getting closer. I told my sister to get the hell out of there. Her going first off the bridge and down the hill. I went second, and as I turned to look at the bridge again, it was 5 feet in front of me, on all fours once again. It stood there as me and my sister skated off, and this isn't even the end. I told my sister to head to the main building since there's cameras and lots of lights. We skateboarded for what seemed like hours. Every minute seemed to last an eternity. As we finally get to the main building, we finally stopped riding our boards. Out of breath and scared, we both looked around, and by this time, it was pitch black outside. We made a mad dash to the car, taking a path we have never seen before, but it was outside the park, which made us feel safer. After we got to my sister's Jeep, we both got in, hearts racing and scared out of our minds, and when we tried to leave the gate, it was locked, meaning we couldn't leave since there was only one way in and out of the park. We got even more scared. We tried everything to get out. We even thought about just leaving the car behind and walking the 2 hours home. But we drove onto the sidewalk and got out of the park. To this day, I won't ever go back into those wetlands ever again, even in daylight. Whatever that thing was, I never want to see it again. I can't stop thinking about it, and I'm almost 19. You can think this is just a story, but it really did happen. Me and my sister don't even talk about it to this day. Something changed between us. I could feel it after that very day.
October 22nd, 2011. Night of day 2. Stopped for the night in the valley. Cooking dinner now. Chicken and rice again. Dead tired and I'm getting too old for this. No progress on the hikers and still smells like death, though much stronger than before. I've just heard some sounds that sound like they could be voices. I can't get the radio to work in this valley. Looks like I'm not getting dinner tonight after all. Going to take a light pack and see if I can follow these voices. October 22nd, 2011. Night of day 2. Second entry scribbled. Dear God, what did I find? Barely made it to this cave. I can hear it scratching and gurgling outside. Going to try and block the entrance and see if I could stay here overnight. I found out where the smell of death came from. Got the cave entrance cracked covered with a large rock and some brush. It will have to do. The beast is still outside clawing at the crack in the rock. Don't think I'll sleep tonight anyway. Not after what I saw. I might as well record this because these might be my last words. For the first time in my career, I'm scared. I don't even know what I saw. It was huge, about 7.5 feet tall, impossibly fast. Smells like putrid meat. Earlier when I had left camp, The voices outside became more and more persistent. They were definitely human voices. I followed them until I reached the clearing, and suddenly, everything went silent. No voices, no hikers. It sounded like the forest itself was holding its breath. I heard a slight sound behind me before I was thrown off my feet. Knocked the wind out of me. My rifle was ripped from my hand before I could even use it. I was picked up by my leg and thrown across the clearing. I could feel its claws digging like knives into my muscle. The thing dragged me upright against the tree, and I could feel its breath on my neck, breathing out a putrid smell. I could feel the blood pouring from my leg and soaking into my pants. The agonizing pain from the wound left me trembling. I could feel the weight of its body as it pushed up against me, ready to go in for the kill. I heard the smack of its mouth opening and prepared myself to die when a crash in the distance distracted the beast long enough for me to make a break for it. I ran for my life, and I didn't look back but knew it wasn't far behind me. About 20 feet away was the entry to this cave that I was able to squeeze into. It's still outside. I could hear it shuffling around, trying to get into the crack, and I could hear the heavy breathing, the sucking, gasping sound coming from its mouth. I have no idea what I'm going to do. Dear God, please help me out of this. I want to see my wife again. I want to see my kids again. My nose is filled with the putrid smell of impending death. If I make it through the night, my plan is to wait until first light and try to escape back to the ranger station. Those are the last words we have by Craig McKay. When he never reported back, we assumed his radio had gone out of range, but after a couple of days, we sent a search party to find him. Well, we found him all right. From the tracks, it looks like Craig left the cave early the next day. He makes it about 50 feet from the cave entrance when a second set of tracks catches up to him. Goat tracks. More specifically, a goat with only 2 legs. The gait matches something that would be a bit more than 7 feet, like Craig described in his journal. What we found of Craig was dragged 70 feet up a nearby tree and torn to pieces. He was hardly recognizable. His torso was jammed onto a short branch on the tree that kept him hanging there. His arms splayed out to his sides. His innards were strewn around the base of the tree. The jagged, shattered remains of his leg bones stuck out of the early snowfall that had come to the mountains this year. Nothing appeared eaten or missing, but not a single piece of him was left untouched by the monster. It took the rest of the day and a special rope team to get him down. The missing hikers were never found, though scraps of clothing matching what they were wearing have been found in the same valley where Craig died. Like I said earlier, the official story is a bear attack. Bears don't do this. We don't know what did this. We've rerouted trails to stay away from this area, but we still hear reports of human-sounding voices coming from the woods, and we've had some more hikers than normal go missing in the last 5 years. Some are found, but it's always too late. Some are arranged like Craig was. Broken warnings to other hikers who dare intrude upon the beast's forest. Some are just never seen again.
I'd like to start off by saying my parents live on a plantation in the middle of nowhere in Mississippi. I won't say specifically where due to privacy. Growing up, it was me and my brother, who is 4 years older than I, and he's still my best friend to this day. My dad was a farmer, so me and my brother both grew up with a love for the outdoors and adventure. We have over 7,000 acres and a total of 6 barns. My grandparents owned this land before my father inherited it. They owned slaves, and my grandfather treated them all well and even built a small community for them behind our barns so they would be close by in case they were needed. It's the 21st century, so we had no slaves. We had upgraded to farmhands by this point when I was a kid. I was 6 years old at the time of this encounter, and my brother was 10. My mother had just passed away, and it was just us 3 left. We were out one day, exploring the barn. My dad was out in the fields, tilling to prepare the crops we had coming in. We ended up down in the community, which was about 2 miles or so from our house, which consisted of 7 houses that were out in the woods. By this time, they were overgrown and underkept due to their lack of tenants who were in charge of upkeep. To give you a bit of insight into how these looked, I will try my best to give you a brief explanation. There were all wooden houses, 1 story of course, with a small porch and a large wooden door. They had 2 windows on each side of the front door, and windows all along the sides, all broken. The grass was waist high, and the tree limbs had broken into the windows, and some had even grown into the sides of one house. My brother was carrying a machete to chop away some of the undergrowth so we could get to them. We entered the front house that was a bit bigger than the rest, with tin on the roof and a brick chimney. The steps broke under our feet, and my brother had to help me climb up. The porch had almost completely rotted by this point. I'm not a tall girl, and my legs are especially short, making high cabinets and big steps difficult for me, even now. My brother went first, opening the door with a heavy kick from the wood being warped and disfigured. He shut the door best he could behind us. We entered the house to see most of the floor was missing, revealing grass and even small trees growing through the floor. Rodents scattered in every direction, making me yelp, but my brother just laughed. There was a mattress to the left that springs were the only thing remaining. All of a sudden, we heard a loud crack right outside the door, causing both of us to freeze where we were. My brother whispered that it was probably a deer and to be super quiet so we could see him. We both slowly crept over to one of the windows to try to see outside and catch the deer. We both had a love for animals and enjoyed watching them. As we reached the window, we heard a very hushed voice, and I very distinctly remember the deep growl of one of the voices telling the other, "Shut up. I don't know where they went, but I swear to God when we find them, we'll kill all of them. I don't care. I'll kill them before I go to jail." Then he erupted into maniacal laughter that echoed through the woods. I remember the look on my brother's face. I knew he was terrified. My brother was only 10 at the time, but he was almost 6 feet, and almost nothing scared him. If he was scared, I knew I should be. He whispered for me to crouch down so he couldn't be seen through the window. I crept down next to a rotten couch that reeked of decay. The smell alone made me gag. Tears were spilling out of my eyes, and I kept my hands over my mouth to keep my sobs quiet. I bit down so hard on my hand, I remember tasting blood. My brother was peering over the side of the window, his face white. I heard limbs breaking as the trespassers were making their way towards every house to find us. I remember thanking God that my brother had shut the door. He motioned me to come towards him, and I slowly crept to where he was, trying to make as little as noise as possible. He told me he was going to open the door, and when he did, then I needed to run all the way back to the house and try to find Dad. He kept nudging me towards the door and was getting frustrated when I wouldn't move. I heard one of the men tell the other one to check the big building, and my heart froze. The house we were in was significantly bigger than the others, and I knew they were coming for us. We heard sticks snapping from every direction, and in my child's mind, I knew we were going to die. Nothing is scarier than thinking you're going to die at such a young age. I was absolutely terrified. I was behind my brother against the wall, and he was holding my hand. I remember how sweaty his shaking hand was and how fast his heart was beating. He had the machete brandished like some sword in a sci-fi movie, and I almost chuckled at the sight. As scared as I was, the door to the house was kicked open, and there stood 4 men, standing about 6 feet or so in height. They all looked like they hadn't bathed in years, and I could smell them from where they were standing. They smelt of rotten meat and body odor. Their teeth were yellowing, some missing, and they looked like they had been beat up, covered in bruises and blood. The blonde guy in the front was the first to speak. His voice still terrorizes me to this day. "Well, look at what we have here. A knight in shining armor, and what a damn princess." He had laughed. My brother spoke in the deepest voice he could manage. This is my dad's land. You better get out. He's got guns and he'll shoot you." The blonde guy chuckled, shaking his head, and took a step towards us. The next thing he said chilled me to my core. "Your daddy can't save you. No one can. I'm your god now." He said as he took another step towards us. He looked over at me, and my blood went cold. He smiled, and I could see he only had one front tooth, and only a few were left in his menacing smile. "I love pretty blonde girls. I'd love to take you with me, my own pretty little girl. I've always wanted one." I cried out and buried my face into my brother's back as I wept, screaming for my dad. "Daddy can't save you now," he screamed, and my brother lunged toward the guy and swung the machete as hard as he could, almost knocking himself over from its weight. All three of the guys started laughing maniacally. My brother stepped closer to the men, swinging the machete again, coming inches from the blonde guy's face. He leaned back to avoid the blow and started only laughing louder. The sound was like something out of the most awful horror movie. I could hear the crackling in their voices. Their smiles made it all the more worse. All three of the men were in the house with us now, and the lanky black-haired guy shut the door behind him. They kept inching closer to us, and my brother was telling me to stay behind him as he kept the machete pointed towards them. Then, the most heavenly sound. Out of nowhere, we heard a truck horn, and my heart jumped into my throat. The road leading to the community was maybe 200 yards from the house, with few trees between it. The guys went stock straight and bolted out the door. One of their legs fell through the floor, but he quickly yanked it out and bolted. We looked out to see my dad and cousins jumping out of his truck with all their guns in hand. They fired a few shots, missing the men by only inches. My dad ran into the house and scooped me up. My brother was crying, and my dad was too. He hugged me and my brother so tight that day. My dad never let us go near the community again, and only let us go into the barns if he was with us. He told me recently he thought he were dead already, and he will never be happier than the day he found us alive. As for the guys, after my dad and cousins arrived, they bolted deeper into the woods, and my cousins pursued them but gave up after a mile or so. My cousin still swears he shot one of them in the leg, but it was never confirmed. My dad told my brother he was coming to the barn for a drink, and to the rest for a minute, and heard my screams, and they immediately followed them to us. My brother and I both received intense counseling for the next few months afterwards. I'm 22 years old now, and I still wake up in a panic, reliving the worst day of my life with those awful men. I am so thankful for my brother for doing his best to keep me alive. I'm even more thankful for my dad and cousins, and that they had given the fields a rest, even if just for a moment. God only knows what would have happened to us had they not shown up. It scares me to this day to think about it.
So, I quit my job as a park ranger a few days ago. Not because I got tired of it, it's because I've seen some crazy shit. I wasn't one of those park rangers that stand around or sit in a shack. I was the kind that were bound to towers, taking radio calls and more. So it was a normal day just sitting, looking out for any strange things. You may be asking strange things. When I first got the job, they informed me of strange entities and happenings, those I still do not know to this day. As day started setting, I got a radio call from the other tower. Yes, I had the night shift that day. The man at the tower, or Chris, told me he's heading home, and just a reminder to look out cause night isn't pretty. As I see his lights turn off at the tower, I knew that my shift started. Nothing really happens when you work the night shift, but this specific day was strange. I was sitting next to the park map they left us when I hear static coming from the radio. I knew someone was trying to contact the tower, so I walked over. Before I had time to respond, a scared, out-of-breath man was on the radio. "Hello," I heard. I did the standard procedure. "This is Tower 4. What seems to be the problem?" "Finally, someone help," the man said in relief. I was on the trail when I heard something behind me." "Any more information?" I asked him. "Yeah, I started to speed up when I did it. It sounded like something was running after me. As soon as I heard it, I started running." "Stay on the line," I said. I opened the instruction manual I was reading, the part about hikers being chased by an animal. As I was reading, I heard a scream over the radio. "Hello, do you copy?" I said. "Help. Whatever was chasing me is still chasing me." "Keep running, but where are you?" "The lake." "That's near Tower 2. Head to the nearest tower." We always leave the towers open, because when the shifts are over, they are required to unplug and put the radio in the locked box. Yeah, that's dumb, but it's how it works. As I return to the radio, I hear a scream from the radio and outside. It sounded like somebody was getting murdered. "Hello, where are you?" I hear on the radio. I lied for my safety. "I'm at the tower I sent you to." "Okay." He sounded so calm. I pulled out my binoculars and zoomed in on Tower 2. What I saw scares the shit out of me. It was a creature looking at me with red glowing eyes. It was waving at me. I was frozen in a state of paralysis, just being watched by this creature. It was weird. It almost looked like something out of a movie or a game. As I started to feel like I could move again, I used it to grab the hunting rifle given to me. I aimed, but nothing was there anymore. I sat down and got the flask I hid in my drawer, and I took one sip. Then I heard the familiar creak of my tower steps. It was late, and no one comes to check up on me at this time. I hid under the bed provided. "Who's there?" the thing said. It sounded like my boss, but I knew it wasn't it. It sounded like a somewhat good impression. I knew it wasn't him when I saw its legs. It had hooves and fur, and I only saw its bottom part. It left. But whatever was there could replicate voices. Whatever it was, I don't know, but that was the one part that almost made me quit. But there are many more reasons. I have been a park ranger in a national park that's located in the United Kingdom, England, for just over 10 years. I'm not going to tell you which one, or even the county of which it's located, for the sake of my job, as I still work here, but there are some pretty weird things that you find every so often while on shift. Things that my superiors would likely not appreciate me sharing online. My job mainly involves patrolling the trails and checking that they're all in a safe state for people to walk through. I was also asked to talk with school children in assemblies and such after about a year or so on the job to express how important it is to stay with the group on the trails. I gave pretty obvious reasons for this, but little did I know, I would soon discover some of the horrifying truths as to why they should never wander off. The first story I'm going to share with you took place on a beautiful spring morning in June, I think. This was during my first year on the job. The sun was still low in the sky, but it was slowly rising and brightening my surroundings. I was on a normal morning patrol through one of the deeper trails as it hadn't been checked recently, and protocol to frequently check all the trails for fallen trees and any potential natural hazards to hikers. It was such a beautiful morning. I remember walking along with a slight smile on my face as I listened to nature, waking up in the trees, and I found the cool breeze very relaxing, and it had a truly peaceful effect on my mood. Suddenly, the trees to my left were filled with the sounds of birds squawking loudly as they frantically flew away. I stopped and listened for just a moment. Silence. A quote from another story I have read here reads, very true to this situation. "Prey is silent when predators are near, Now understand that we don't have any bears or wolves here in England. Nothing like that. So I suppose it could be a deer that had snapped a twig. However, the noise wouldn't usually drop like that, as deer don't pose much of a threat to wildlife at all. I continued on, not thinking anything of it, and after a short time, I got the urge to check behind me. There was a man walking maybe 100 meters back, and I was on a long straight, so it was easy to tell. I was confused as the trails aren't usually used until a little later when early dog walkers would show up, and even then, few would wander this far into the woods at this time. He seemed to be walking at a very relaxed pace, his hands in his dark blue hoodie's pockets, and he had faded blue jeans. I radioed over to ask if anyone had seen someone enter the trail I was walking shortly after I left, but no one had seen anyone come in or out, other than the occasional dog walker. I thought nothing of it, but continued on a slightly hurried pace. I usually wouldn't be bothered about it being out on my own with another stranger. I wasn't a small bloke, nor someone to get spooked easily. However, this guy just gave me a bad feeling. I was approaching a gate that leads to a much denser area of the woodland, more like a thick forest, and as I closed the gate behind me, I noticed this man had stopped dead in his tracks. He seemed to be staring right at me, but I couldn't be sure. Then he broke into a sprint. Not a light jog that somebody out for exercise might. I'm talking a full-on sprint. It was almost aggressive. I freaked out and turned to run. Why would a complete stranger, who was previously so calm and relaxed, suddenly be sprinting at me? He hadn't called for help or even waved to me. Fortunately, the trail's long straight section was over, and I ran around a curve and hid behind one of the many large rocks that were by the side of the trail. I could hear his heavy footsteps thudding towards me, right until he was just on the other side of the rock, and he stopped. Again, dead in his tracks. He wasn't even out of breath. He just seemed to stand there for a while, and then just walked off. I waited for what must have been close to 10 minutes to be sure he was far ahead, and radioed the strange encounter to my colleagues, who agreed it was strange, and I cautiously continued on with my patrol. I never saw that strange man again, and I hope I never do. I have many more memories I would like to share with you. Stay safe out there. You are rarely truly alone in the forest. I'm back with another story I'd like to share with you. Or rather, I feel the need to share with you, as there's nothing I like about it. When someone goes missing in our national parks, the British Search and Rescue Team are contacted immediately. However, they are always at least half an hour's flight away, and even then they only have so much flight time before they are forced to turn their helicopter around to refuel. This leaves a lot of searching down to the rangers, as we know all of the areas and trails very well. It's always an adrenaline-pumped situation to be in, as you never know what the outcome will be. Usually, the helicopter spots the lost people within 20 minutes of joining the search, but then there are the missing people. You should know that between the rangers, we refer to these situations with two categories: lost people and missing people. A lost person is a normal search and rescue scenario. Somebody went down the wrong trail and hasn't been seen in a while, and perhaps thrown a broken leg for good measure. The main thing is that we find them, even if they are a little beaten up. A missing person is somebody who hasn't been seen for anything over a day, or if the situation just seems off. For example, when people just seem to disappear. I have one particular case I'm going to share with you. I will warn you closer to the time, but there is some pretty explicit content in this memory, so here is your far pre-warning. It was a pretty standard shift. The sky was just starting to dim as the sun started sinking towards the horizon, and I was sat in the ranger station, taking calls and checking emails, when a woman comes bursting through the door, absolutely beside herself. Her hair is a mess, with leaves tangled in it. Her makeup is all smudged down, and across her face, and her eyes are red from crying. She's telling me that her son had been by her side 1 minute, and when he went into the bushes, just off the trail for a wee, he never came back. There was no scream, no noise, no nothing. I knew at this instant we had a missing person on our hands, and my heart stopped. A missing child was always bad news, and seldom had a happy ending. He had been in the bush for maybe 2 minutes when his mother called out to him, and she went running into the woods to try and find him. She was very lucky to have made it back to the trail without getting lost, or worse, if you ask me. I tried my best to calm her down and took her to a map, and after showing her where our station was, I asked her to try and locate their average location at the time while I made some calls. She protested at first, but after assuring her we had dealt with this kind of situation many times before, she brought herself to trust my instructions and started tracing her tracks on the map. I immediately called the search and rescue team closest to us and told them the exact location was to be confirmed, but to dispatch a helicopter for a missing child. They give us an ETA of 40 minutes. I gather all the rangers on duty, and after confirming with the woman where she believed they were when he disappeared, we all get assigned grids on the map to check, and we head out. We are very thorough as we search, and we each square off the grid very effectively and do not leave so much as a rock unturned. So we're getting deeper and deeper into the woods at this point. We'd been searching for a good couple of hours, but the dogs hadn't picked up the boy's scent yet, and we were merely doing a routine comb-styled search. The helicopter was buzzing around non-stop, and everybody was quiet. No one really spoke much while looking for children. I think it's because of the fact that it's a child we are looking for, not an adult who may be able to look after themselves. I'm getting this heavy, knotted feeling in my gut. You know, the kind you get when you just know that it's going to be a fruitless effort. I should also mention that it's getting dark now, and there's not much light left, and what little is left is completely blocked out by the trees, so it's flashlights from here on out. We'll never find this kid, bro, my colleague said in a completely flat voice. Don't talk like that. We never know what we can find while searching, I reply sharply, though deep down in my gut, I knew that child was gone. The helicopter heads back for some more fuel and comes back again. After a further few hours of searching, it is getting very dark, and we call it a night as everyone needs to be back before the forest was completely consumed by darkness. The woman stayed in one of the medical beds we had previously prepared for her son, though I doubt she slept at all. I watched the cameras that lay deep in the forest, someone in the area the child could have walked in. After an hour or so of nothing, I eventually decide to call it a night. We didn't find this boy the next day, or the day after that, for the matter. 3 weeks later, one of our rangers radios that they found the body of the child deep into the woods and that we need to get there, and fast. She sounded worried. A few rangers and I jump into a 4x4 that we used to get deep into the woods quickly, and we make our way to the location described. It's a clearing near an old entrance to a closed-off cave. The trees seem to all lean over towards the cave entrance, as if to be watching intently for whatever is next to climb out. We arrived after a 10 or maybe 15-minute ride. It was one of the most uncomfortable and tense rides of my career, as the vehicle access trail was rarely used, as we didn't have much reason to come this far out into the woods, and we've never traveled at this speed. We parked in the clearing and approached what would turn out to be one of the most disturbing experiences of my career. I would like to take this opportunity to warn you that what I describe next could be disturbing to some, and cause upset, as I can only label it as child abuse. The boy was curled in the fetal position, laid on his left side, and it may have looked as if he died naturally, if it wasn't for the huge pool of blood he was laying in, along with the fact that he was completely naked. We rolled his stiff body over onto his back, and I think we all took a step back, as if some force had pushed us all away at the same time. Some sick fuck had sliced his gut open, allowing all of his innards to spill out. But the horror didn't end there. Oh God, no. Please understand that this is not an easy memory for me to recite, so forgive me for not going into too much detail, though I doubt I will feel like they missed out. The left everything of this boy was gone. His left eye, his left ear, left testicle, left hand, foot, etc. I was mortified, and I'm not ashamed to say that I threw up violently, almost instantly, upon taking all of this in for a moment. Every cut was very neat and clean, more so than you'd imagine a surgeon can make, especially out in the woods. What was even more horrifying was that the body couldn't have been more than a few days old. Whoever, or whatever for that matter, had taken him, had done this, had kept him hostage for almost 3 weeks. The thought of how terrified this child must have been still sickens me, even now, nearly 7 years on. We called it in an air ambulance and took his body away to be examined by the police and checked for prints. Now, we're not really meant to be kept in the loop on following up on investigations after they've left the park. However, the local police officers would tend to update us regularly on the results of these findings. An officer had rung up to update us, and his voice sounded dull. He sounded almost as if he was very depressed to be making the call, and I can understand why. The post-mortal had revealed that the cuts all seemed to be taken from when the boy was alive. Furthermore, it seemed that there was no traces of food in the boy's stomach, so he clearly wasn't fed either. Apparently, there were more body parts missing, but I just thanked the officer for informing me and hung up the phone, slowly. I sat there for a good 20 minutes, bawling my eyes out, before relaying this horrific update to my colleagues. How that little boy didn't die sooner is beyond me. I can't contemplate how this could happen, but whoever or whatever did this is definitely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. That trail was closed off for a good time, and there were armed patrols through that area of the woods for nearly 4 months, following in a desperate attempt to find a trace of who did this, or at least where it happened. We found nothing. Not even the other body parts. They even explored that of the cave that was still, quote-unquote, safe access, despite it being closed off due to many deaths due to a lack of safety. This is not the only experience of this nature that occurred. However, I'm going to cut it off here. I'm done writing for today as I get emotional, so just allowing the memory to crop back to me. Please, keep your children close by your side, and if they need the toilet, they must either wait or you must accompany them and never stray far from the trail. No more than 5 meters would be my recommendation. Not unless you know exactly what you're doing.